Wireless LAN Security, Part 2. In this video, we're going to kick things off by learning about some of the security solutions and improvements that we can use to plug some of the security holes that we had learned about in our Part 1 video. And we'll also learn about what should be included in a written security policy for a wireless LAN. And then we'll finish off by learning about some of the general wireless security recommendations that don't fit neatly in the other areas that we've learned about so far. Now, if you remember in Part 1 of our security video, we learned how WEP is quite vulnerable. And in a nutshell, WEP is just not a very robust method for providing security for a wireless LAN. However, what if that is the only option that you have for providing security for your wireless LAN? Well, what are you going to do in that situation? Well, let's bring up a whiteboard and learn about that. Now, first off, it's going to be a lot easier for a hacker to derive what the WEP key is if they've been statically assigned, meaning an administrator manually entered in the key that's used for WEP encryption both on the access point and on the wireless station. And typically, statically assigned WEP keys don't change very frequently. It will probably be the same key for at least a week, if not a month. And if that is the case, if that same WEP key is being used over and over again, day in and day out, it makes it much easier for a hacker to be able to get enough packets to find out what the static WEP key is. However, the usage of WEP can be made a little more secure by using a central key distribution server, or otherwise known as a radius server, to dynamically assign a new WEP key to both the station and the access point, either on a per session or on a per packet basis. So it's going to be much harder for a hacker to be able to derive what the WEP key is if it's changing on a very regular basis, either on the per session or per packet basis. Now, by changing the WEP keys this frequently, it's going to add overhead to your wireless network, but this is the type of overhead that can be justified to enhance the security of your wireless network. Also, by using a radius server to automatically assign these keys, that's going to reduce the administrative burden of having to manually type in these static WEP keys on the access point and on the wireless stations. Now, in addition to using the radius server to provide these WEP keys automatically to the wireless stations and the wireless access points, we also need to have a method in place to be able to ensure that unauthorized users aren't able to access the wireless network or aren't able to connect to and associate to our access points on our wireless network. That is the second task of a radius server. Let's bring up another whiteboard and learn about that. Now, if you remember from our discussion about wireless LAN standards, the 802.11 standard only specifies two methods for authentication, shared key and open methods of authenticating the wireless station, but it doesn't specify or require the use of wireless LAN user authentication. And that's where the 802.1x authentication standard comes into play. We can use this to authenticate and authorize devices connected to the LAN either through an Ethernet or wireless connection. And the use of 802.1x authentication requires the use of a radius server and in conjunction with the Extensible Authentication Protocol, or EAP. And so by using 802.1x authentication standard, it will provide us enhanced security for our wireless network by dynamically assigning the WEP keys, and by using the Extensible Authentication Protocol, we can authenticate the wireless users by either using a username and password or by using a digital certificate. So even if our wireless access points only support the use of WEP encryption, by combining 802.1x authentication with the WEP encryption option that we have on our wireless access points, we can provide infinitely better security than just by using static WEP keys. So by using 802.1x authentication, we provide a much higher level of user authentication in contrast to using MAC address filtering, open system, or shared key authentication. And we're combining the authentication with the dynamic distribution of our WEP keys. So we've got this 1-2 punch here of using 802.1x authentication to providing a much higher level and much more robust level of security when we're using WEP encryption. Now, something to take note of is that EAP, or the Extensible Authentication Protocol, is called this because it can use different types of authentication protocols. It's extensible in that you can add on different types of authentication protocols. And Windows XP out of the box supports 2 different EAP types. Let's bring up another whiteboard and look at the more popular EAP types. So first off, in order to authenticate the user that's trying to establish a wireless connection from their laptop to the access point, there has to be an EAP type that is in common between the radius server and the wireless station, aka the desktop computer or their laptop computer. So if you're trying to troubleshoot authentication problems for a wireless station, you need to ensure that the EAP type that is being used on the wireless station is the same type that's being used on the radius server. So this is a list of the 4 most popular EAP types. The first one is EAP Message Digest 5, or MD5. Using EAP MD5 is very easy to set up because it uses username and password-based authentication, but the disadvantage of using MD5 is that it does not support the use of automatic key distribution. In contrast, EAP Transport Layer Security, or TLS, requires a little more effort to put in place because this uses certificate-based authentication. Both the radius server and the wireless stations must have a digital certificate installed, and this also helps to provide for mutual authentication. Both the client and the server must mutually authenticate with each other. And so to set this up, you're going to need to have a certification authority or obtain digital certificates from a trusted certification authority. So it provides a very high degree of authentication, and it also supports automatic key distribution. Now, EAP Tunneled Transport Layer Security is kind of a combination of our first 2 EAP types. Using Tunneled Transport Layer Security requires that a digital certificate be installed on the radius server, but not on the wireless stations. The digital certificate will be used to provide a secure tunnel where the username and password from the wireless station is tunneled through to the radius server. And this also supports the use of dynamic or automatic key distribution. And our last EAP type is kind of another version of EAP TTLS. Protected EAP, or PEEP for short, was developed by Microsoft and Cisco, and it's actually another method for providing a secure tunnel for transmitting a username and password. By using protected EAP, or PEEP, it only requires that a digital certificate be installed on the radius server. A digital certificate is not required on the wireless station. So the user on the wireless station, a Microsoft station, for example, if the user is using Windows XP, they will transmit their username and password by using the Microsoft Challenge Handshake Authentication Protocol, which is transmitted securely within this tunnel that is created by the digital certificate on the radius server. And using PEEP also supports the dynamic distribution of keys. So again, by using WEP in conjunction with 802.1x authentication, which uses the radius server to dynamically or automatically assign WEP keys to the wireless stations and to provide very strong level authentication by using these different EAP types. However, using 802.1x authentication in conjunction with WEP doesn't get to the root of the vulnerabilities and the problems with WEP itself. Yes, by assigning these keys on a very regular basis, it will help to slow a hacker down, but it's not going to absolutely 100% prevent a hacker from getting into your wireless network when you're using WEP with 802.1x authentication. So what we need really is a new solution, and that new solution is called Wi-Fi Protected Access. Let's bring up another whiteboard and learn about that. Now, Wi-Fi Protected Access, or WPA for short, was designed by the Wi-Fi Alliance in conjunction with the IEEE. Now, WPA was created explicitly to address the vulnerabilities found in WEP and as a replacement for WEP. WPA uses the Temporal Key Integrity Protocol to provide encryption for data on a wireless network, and it provides a much more robust method for protecting the keys that are used for encrypting the data on the wireless network. And by using TKIP in conjunction with the Michael Message Integrity Check feature, or MIC for short, this is used to ensure the integrity of the keys, meaning to ensure that the keys haven't actually been tampered with. And WPA also supports the use of 802.1x authentication for client-server mutual authentication and the dynamic distribution of the keys that are used for WPA encryption. However, even WPA is not meant as a permanent solution for securing data on a wireless network and for providing authentication. It's meant as an interim solution until the IEEE 802.11i standard came about. Recently, the IEEE ratified a new standard for providing security on the wireless network called 802.11i. Let's bring up another whiteboard and learn about that. Now, first off, WPA version 2 or WPA2 is based on the security requirements of the 802.11i security standard. And you'll often find that WPA2 and 802.11i are used interchangeably. WPA2 is essentially synonymous with the 802.11i security standard. So, for example, if a vendor were to state that their access point complies to WPA2 standards, that means that it also complies with 802.11i security standards. Now, the second generation of Wi-Fi protected access provides a much stronger level of encryption than just WPA with TKIP. WPA2, the main differentiator between WPA2 and WPA, is that WPA2 uses Advanced Encryption Standard, or AES for short. And the main reason why AES is used for encryption in WPA2 is that it's required by some government agencies in order to comply with the United States government's cryptographic security requirements that are found in the publication FIPS 140-2. So this publication is a guideline of the cryptographic security requirements that are required by some U.S. government agencies, and WPA2 with AES adheres to these cryptographic security requirements. Now, similar to WPA, WPA2 also supports the use of authentication with 802.1x and EAP to provide the client-server mutual authentication, and also supports the dynamic key distribution through the use of a radius server, but also supports a personal authentication mode through the use of a pre-shared key. So both WPA and WPA2 allow for the use of a pre-shared key for personal authentication, which is typically used in a SOHO environment, small office, home office, or a personal consumer environment where a user simply does not have a radius server to provide 802.1x authentication and the dynamic distribution of keys. The combination of WPA2 devices with 802.1x and EAP authentication is a winning security combination. Right now, there are no tools that are available that have been found to be able to hack the encryption in AES. So it's very strong now, and it should be strong for several years going forward. Now, in order to use this winning combination, you're going to need three things. You're going to need a wireless station that supports WPA2. You're going to need a wireless access point that supports WPA2, and then you'll need a radius server to provide 802.1x authentication with EAP and the dynamic distribution of keys. So in my particular example, I have met all three of those requirements. So let's bring up the management page for my Proxima wireless access point and look at some of the security options that we have here. So on this particular access point, the AP700, I can access the security settings by going to SSID, then click on Security Profile tab. And then from here, I have a single security profile which supports WEP, 802.1x, WPA, WPA with a pre-shared key, and 802.11i, which is WPA2, and 802.11i with pre-shared key, which again is synonymous with WPA2. So let's take a look at these settings a little closer by selecting that, then clicking on the Edit button, and we'll scroll down here. So we just simply enable the type of wireless stations that we have, the security that we want to provide for the wireless stations that we have in our environment. Is it a WEP station? No, it is not. It is a 802.1x station used in conjunction with WEP? No, it is not. Is it a WPA station? Yes, I have a WPA station. I'm going to use that in conjunction with 802.1x and TKIP. And here's the option for WPA with a pre-shared key. And I also have a station that supports 802.11i, or again, WPA2, and we see that the authentication mode for a 802.11i station is 802.1x, and the encryption method is AES. Now, since we've configured the security profile to use 802.1x for authentication, we now need to configure the wireless access point to communicate with the Radius server. So to do that, we're going to back out of here and scroll up here and click on Radius Profiles. And in this example, we're going to use a Radius profile for EAP authentication. So we'll select that, click on the Edit button, and we'll scroll down here. And then on most wireless access points, configuring the access point to use a Radius server is typically just a couple of steps. Number one, you type in the IP address of the Radius server. And number two, type in a shared secret key that the Radius server is configured with for the wireless access point, which is the client. So when you're configuring the Radius server, you'll have to configure a client for the Radius server, and you'll need to specify the IP address of the access point, and at that time create a shared secret key, essentially a password that's used between the access point and the Radius server, so the access point can authenticate with the Radius server. And the port number here, 1812, is the default port that Radius servers listen on for 802.1x authentication. So this access point is now set up and configured to authenticate users using 802.1x and EAP. And so now if we go down to our Network Connections folder, go to the Properties of our wireless network connection, click on the Wireless Networks tab. We see that we're connected to Nugget Lab. Let's drill down here a little closer and see how we're connected. We're connected using WPA. The encryption type is TKIP. The key is provided for us automagically with 802.1x authentication using PEEP. And again, the advantage of using protected EAP, or PEEP for short, is that it only requires a digital certificate be installed on the Radius server and not on the wireless station. So let's close out of here now. And let's go back to our whiteboard and learn about another method for securing our wireless LANs, which is through the use of a virtual private network. Now, for access points and clients that only support WEP and they don't support WPA or WPA2, a secure alternative for transmitting data on the wireless network is to use WEP in conjunction with a virtual private network. Virtual private networks are typically used for securing data that is transmitted over the unsecure network, which is the Internet. So with a virtual private network, we create a secure tunnel from a client to a server, and the secure tunnel is encapsulated using a protocol, a virtual private network protocol, which is typically either point-to-point tunneling protocol, or PPTP, or IP security protocol, or IPsec. So you might have a client in a hotel room that wants to establish a secure connection to a server in their office. So they first establish a connection to their internet service provider, and once they've established that connection, they establish a virtual private network connection, either using either one of these two protocols, typically using either one of these two protocols. And let's say, for example, they establish a VPN connection by using IPsec, and that in turn will create a tunnel, an encapsulated tunnel that the traffic will pass through, but the outside of this tunnel is being protected through the use of these encapsulating protocols, in this example IPsec. So the data that is transmitted in a secure virtual private network tunnel between the client in the hotel room and the server is being protected from hackers out on the Internet through the use of this IPsec. So this technology can also be implemented on a wireless LAN to help provide a greater degree of security for the data that is being transmitted on a wireless LAN and that is destined to the LAN as well, the wired LAN. So some access points do double duty. Some access points have a VPN server built into it. So in this example where we have an access point and a VPN server, what would happen is the wireless station would first establish an association with the access point. And then once that association has been established, the wireless station would then establish a virtual private network connection with the access point. So the benefit of that then is the data that is transmitted through this VPN tunnel has this added layer of protection. And the added layer of protection, again, is the encapsulating protocol. Typically, again, either point-to-point tunneling protocol or the most popular one is IPsec security protocol. So this provides a greater level of security, but it adds some administrative overhead and some network overhead as well. So we have another protocol that we have to deal with. Another protocol is being transmitted. That's certainly going to reduce throughput a bit. So some of the disadvantages of using a VPN for securing the data on a wireless network are this is something else to configure, something else to set up, both on either an access point or on a VPN device, and then you have to configure all the wireless stations with a VPN client software, which may or may not be included on the wireless station. And if you have guest access to your wireless network, you would have to supply those guest wireless stations with a VPN client software. And a big issue with using a VPN on a wireless network is that they don't provide for transparent roaming between wireless subnets. And this is a huge disadvantage for using a VPN on a wireless network. So typically what is used is a wireless LAN gateway. Now, we learned about wireless LAN gateway devices in the wireless LAN infrastructure devices video in this exam pack, but in this context, the thing to remember about these devices is that if your wireless LAN infrastructure doesn't support WPA2 yet, this is kind of the next best solution to that. Instead of using just dedicated VPN devices, wireless LAN gateways typically will support VPN servers. They'll incorporate firewalls, and to top it all off, they'll support a seamless roaming between your wireless access points across subnet boundaries, and provides centralized security administration and provides temporary guest access as well. Now, oftentimes, wireless administrators are tasked to help create a security policy for the wireless LAN. Let's bring up another whiteboard and learn about what are some of the key elements that should be included in a security policy. So within a security policy, you want to define who has access to sensitive configuration information, such as the logon information, the username and passwords for your wireless access points and your wireless bridges. That is obviously vital information. It's obviously very secure information, and you want to determine who has access to that secure information. Also, the wireless security policy should define how physical security is implemented for the wireless LAN. Now, in addition to providing physical security for the wireless access points and the wireless bridges, one of the things you really need to hammer out in the policy is to define who has access to the wireless stations. What employees are given wireless stations? What is the verification process that is going to be put into place for employees receiving a wireless station? So does any employee in the company get a laptop with a wireless network adapter just by raising up their hand and saying, hey, I would like one of those things too? Now, the reason why I stress this is because the end users are often the weakest link in providing physical security for a wireless LAN. And this is often due to the fact that companies allow the end users to take their laptops with wireless network adapters away from the company premises, to take it home or take it on a business trip, and that's where things get a little hairy. If the laptop is stolen, the person who's stolen that laptop just has to fire it up, and typically the laptops are configured automatically to connect to the wireless network with the configured pre-shared key for either web security or WPA security, or is automatically configured to connect to a virtual private network. And so oftentimes the wireless network is laid bare just because the wireless network settings are configured and stored on a wireless network adapter. If somebody were to steal the wireless network adapter, the web key is often stored in the actual firmware of the device. So we just take it from one laptop, put it into another laptop, and bada bing, bada boom, big boom, I got your web key. So because most companies do allow the users to take their wireless station home with them or on a business trip with them, so again, meaning their laptop with a wireless network adapter, very tight controls need to be put in place as to what is going to be done if a laptop is stolen or the wireless network adapter that was in that laptop is stolen. So, for example, if a wireless station is stolen, you might have to change MAC filters or change WEP keys, or you might even consider changing the SSID of the wireless network itself as well. So having said that, it's also extremely important to define within the security policy measures for inventory and security audits as well. You want to ensure that all wireless devices have been accounted for. So you want to do a periodic inventory of all the wireless stations that have been issued, all the wireless LAN devices that are in the cage in the back room that are just sitting there in case something does get lost or stolen. You want to make sure that all wireless LAN network adapters are accounted for. And you want to perform a periodic security audits to see if there's any rogue wireless devices using protocol and spectrum analyzers. So the security policy should also define the tasks and the procedures involved with doing the inventory and the security audits. For example, when you're doing the security audits, the security policy should define which tools should be used, who will actually be doing the security audits, who is authorized to perform a security audit, who is authorized to perform an inventory of the wireless LAN devices, and what type of report should be generated after an inventory and security audit has been created, and who has access to these reports as well. Now, something that should absolutely be defined and spelled out in the security policy is whether or not employees should be able to use their company-issued wireless stations, their laptop with a wireless network adapter, at a public wireless network, at a public hotspot, at an airport, at your local Starbucks, hotels, convention centers, wherever the case may be. So think about it. You've got a company-issued laptop with company information, could be very sensitive information, that is now connecting to a public hotspot that typically has either low security measures or no security measures to make it easier for the general public to connect to their wireless network. And if that employee were connected to a hotspot at an airport and they're waiting for their connecting flight for a couple of hours, well, there could be an attacker at the next gate or the next terminal that has nothing else better to do because they're waiting for a connecting flight, and they might attempt to hack into the person's laptop through the public wireless connection. Obviously not a good thing, and there are some companies that do offer some protection. However, you need to define within the security policy what the company's policy will be regarding the usage of public hotspots. And lastly, the security policy should state whether or not logging of users' wireless activity should be enabled on the wireless access points or on a radius server or on both to essentially track what the users are doing on the wireless network. And the policy should also state how long the log files will be kept for and who's going to have access to these log files. And let's finish off now with some general security recommendations for our wireless network. Now, first off, because web can be cracked so easily and so quickly these days, a company should not rely solely on web as their sole means of protecting the wireless network. Even if a radius server is used to provide user authentication and dynamically assign web keys, and the web keys are being rotated every 10 minutes, the attacks on web now are so sophisticated that users can generate enough traffic and capture enough traffic within a 2 to 5 minute time frame to be able to derive what the actual web key is. So for a small office environment, for a home office environment, for consumer uses, web certainly helps to reduce the chance of eavesdropping against a small wireless network. However, for an enterprise-grade wireless network, you should not rely on web as your sole means for protecting the data that is transmitted on a wireless network. Instead, if at all possible, you should use WPA2 with a radius server to provide the dynamic issuing of the keys and user authentication with EAP protocols. Something else that you want to watch out for is that the size of the cell that surrounds the wireless access point should be contained within a physically secure area. You don't want the signal strength of the access point to be so strong, and as a result creating a cell that ekes out into areas that are not physically secure, such as the company parking lot or outside of the security gate that might be surrounding the company parking lot. So when you're going through the process of purchasing wireless access points for your company's wireless network, you want to see whether or not the access point has an option to configure the power output. So you can reduce the power output to control the size of the cell that is surrounding the wireless access point to, again, keep the coverage area of that cell within a physically secure location, just within the walls of the building. Also, you should ideally connect your wireless access points to switches instead of hubs. Hubs are essentially broadcast devices, and when a hub receives a packet to one of the ports, it's going to retransmit or repeat that packet to all the ports on that hub. So what that means is if you have a wireless access point connected to a hub and it receives packets from the wired network, an attacker can be able to sniff out packets both from the wireless network and from the wired network, because all these packets are being repeated at that access point or at the hub that is connected to the access point. In contrast with the switch, when it receives a packet, it reads the destination address and the header information in the packet, and it sends the packet directly to the destination port where the packet is intended to go to. And lastly, after a manufacturer releases a wireless LAN infrastructure device, be it an access point or bridge or a wireless network adapter, oftentimes they will issue software updates and firmware updates to provide more functionality to a wireless infrastructure device, or to fix known issues, or to patch security holes that might be found within a device. So always make sure that you apply the latest and greatest firmware and software updates to your wireless LAN infrastructure devices to make sure that any known issues have been dealt with. And with that, that brings us to the end of this video. Let's bring up another whiteboard, do a quick recap of what we've learned here. So we start off by learning that the best way to improve security on a web network is to use a radius server to dynamically distribute the web keys instead of statically assigning web keys, which are much more vulnerable than dynamically assigned keys. But ideally, we should be using either WPA or best bet WPA2 in conjunction with the radius server to dynamically distribute the either WPA or WPA2 keys versus using a statically assigned pre-shared key. Remember that the radius server also provides user authentication, which is much, much more secure than using MAC address filters as a means of authentication. So in summary, in order to provide the highest level of security that is available today for wireless LANs, you need to either upgrade your devices to the new security standard 802.11i or purchase wireless LAN infrastructure devices that support the new security standard 802.11i and implement WPA2 in conjunction with the radius server to take advantage of the new security standard 802.11i, to take advantage of AES encryption. And we finished off by learning about the key components that comprise a good security policy, and we also learned about some of the general recommendations to enhance the security of a wireless LAN. And with that, that brings us to the end of this video. I hope that this video has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.